Mario! Hello!
Super Mario 64 is a game that needs no introduction, so I won't be giving it one. What I can give it is some serious props for staying relevant and fresh even after being released back in 1996. It's heartwarming to know that one of my favorite childhood games is still very much alive and kicking in the next generation of kids who are probably playing it on an emulator because retro game prices are positively out to lunch. Though, instead of casually playing through each course and obtaining every star, people today take much more joy in completely dissecting and exploiting this game's mechanics. The blitzkrieg of video game speedrunning has had huge impacts on the culture of video games on the internet, and the techniques used to perfect Mario 64 have become household names to even casual fans of the franchise. Kids of the late 90s and early 2000s grew up very attached to the internet, so naturally such an impactful childhood game would be incorporated into countless facets of newfangled digital expression, perhaps none more pronounced than the rise of digital horror. Mario 64 has taken on a new identity not as a foundational three-dimensional video game, but as the host for countless discussions for lost content, corporate conspiracies, and much more. The game was naturally a magnet for playground or spread urban rumors and hoaxes since the very beginning, which naturally led to some rumors becoming more and more developed as people began to understand the source code of the game. Some of these rumors turned out to be truthful, while others dipped their toes into the more fantastical side of speculation and custom content. With the mainstream appeal of creepypastas and other internet horror avenues like analog horror and lost media discussions, it's no surprise Mario 64 became such a popular choice. Long gone are the days of haunted games, and instead we are greeted with discussions of bizarre topics like the Wario apparition, and every copy of the game being personalized through highly intelligent AI that changes game assets for each card of the game's specific owners, which has led people to creating their own assets and models for the game, as an active contribution to the core central idea of Mario 64's esoteric discussions. Entire alternate reality games, usually taking the form of video series, showcase stories of troubled development from the perspectives of fictitious developers trying to perfect the personalization AI. There are far too many examples and branching topics and series for me to list concisely, so I'll leave additional research to you, the loyal viewer. There is much to be said about the macabre nature and content featured in many of these series and posts, but if one were to look closely, they all share the same idea. There's an unconscious, foundational monomyth that connects nearly every topic together. We don't know everything about Mario 64. From its strangely tumultuous development from its entanglement with the Nintendo 64 disk drive, Super Mario 64 in its finished commercial state feels retroactively unnerving and uncomfortable because perhaps our minds are so used to the sprawling worlds and detail of modern gaming, so the wide-open, empty levels feel that much more oppressive than intended on release. I must compare the feeling of the recent trend of people being frightened of GM construct while playing alone. The environments of Mario 64 feel uncanny because environments designed to house a lot of people, being devoid of said people, naturally makes the survival part of the brain that needs social connection inherently uncomfortable. From Peach's castle to shifting sandlands, it isn't uncommon to hear reports of many players feeling oh so lonely as they obtain the stars on the castle walls. Every other Mario game afterwards is populated with lots of faces, both friendly and foe. But Mario 64 has an abundance of empty, solitude space. Perhaps a quirk of the early Nintendo 64 architecture, or perhaps something more. And no other level embodies this cosmic, encroaching, suffocating loneliness than Wet Dry World. In the build-up to the stage, I've made some dastardly claims that this humble Stage 11 in one of the most famous video games of all time is a microcosm of 3D eeriness and potentially something even more sinister. I am going to detail every single aspect of this course I feel is necessary to gain a comprehensive understanding of this stage from top to bottom. I will be covering this level's design, aesthetics, music, stars, enemies, and every aspect in between. What you are about to hear is a complicated and completely exhaustive analysis that makes no promises on overanalyzing and straw-reaching. Every square inch will be held in my intensive scrutiny and watchful eye. The rabbit hole only deepens from here. Brace yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to dive in. As soon as we drop onto the level, we can notice a few glaring details. Depending on the height of your jump, we are immediately introduced to the core gimmick of Wet Dry World, the Wet Dry. The water levels can either be drained or raised by interacting with these strange, multicolored anomalous crystals that appear nowhere else in-game. Crystals located on the very bottom drain the water, crystals on the top cause the water to rise. This changing tide is the beating heart of the level, acting as the fundamental means of traversal through the vertical terrain. Its status as a pseudo-water level might foster some concern amongst players. Aside from their somber soundtracks, Jolly Roger Bay and especially Dire Dire Docks aren't looked at as too favorably for being primarily water levels. I'm unsure if this is a controversial opinion or not, but I quite enjoy swimming in this game. For the third dimension being as little understood as it was in gaming at the time, I admire how intuitive water traversal was in the game. I know many others see water as a way to dramatically slow down gameplay, effectively killing your pacing. Well, worry not, because this first star requires very little water interaction. Shocking Aerolifts has you raise the water to jump on wooden platforms to reach a section with the assortment of aerolifts to reach the star inside of a yellow box, which can easily be circumvented by a skillful long jump. The first star itself is as plain as could be, so I won't spend much time in discussing it itself. However, even the rudimentary level navigation present in this star gives way to what makes this level infamous: its design. Wet Dry World is big, and I mean big. It's massive. Gargantuan, even. Despite the caged-in aesthetic, the amount of horizontal and vertical real estate is shocking. The core water level gimmick allows for nearly every square inch to be explored and mapped by the player, which emphasizes how gargantuan this level is. Your core platforming is done on concrete, stone, bricks, cement, and steel cages, the staples of basic construction jobs. The construction aesthetic, along with the wide-open environments, give you a feeling that this level is nested somewhere between being desolate and perhaps unfinished. A signpost welcomes you to the city, as it's called, which might seem at odds with how the level is built. The simple shapes of the platforms and objects entail that the city, that the sign is referring to, is likely under construction or might not even be built yet. Keep this in mind for later, I will be circling back to this. No other level really has this kind of feel to it. Everywhere feels like a natural, complete environment with life and obstacles around every corner. The enemies that do show up in Wet Dry World are almost entirely robotic and static in nature, aside from the blue skeeters that zip across the surface of the water. The accompanying track only adds to this meandering loneliness that persists throughout this level. The track used in Hazy Maze Cave made sense and fit the claustrophobic and dangerous level design, while feeling queer and unsettling for somewhere so open and devoid of natural hazards like Wet Dry World. Devoid is an apt word for the entirety of this stage. It feels uncomfortable to roam inside the boxed-in geometry of a level that doesn't really feel natural. The textures simply look unfinished, in a way that tickles my gray matter so opaquely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's move on to the second star. Top of the town requires you to raise the water to its maximum height to reach the highest point of the level. Aside from the menacing Chuckya and carefully walking across a narrow wooden beam, you can pretty easily obtain the second star without too much complaints. Again, nothing special or noteworthy, but the star is not the center of attention for this segment. Being this high up, one can only notice the strange skybox the developers chose. Skyboxes are an important part of player immersion for the courses in the game. It rounds out the level's aesthetic and general feel to make the area feel positively conductive and connected to the area. Brightly lit stages have sunny skies, darker stages are gloomy, etc. But here, we are greeted with the deep blues of water, implying that the entire stage takes place in or around water. This is especially confusing given that you can manually control the water level around you. so how are you also submerged in it? This is a harsh clash that Mario 64 typically doesn't have within its levels, which makes Wet Dry World seemingly stand out, perhaps in a worse way. Of course, the elephant in the room cannot be ignored. All around you, a city composed of squat white buildings underneath the water, like a Middle Eastern Atlantis. Speculation was rife on why Nintendo chose this specific image for the skybox and where it came from, and only recently was the true result of it cracked. This skybox image is a combination of a town in Yemen named Shibam, and the mosque of famous Ottoman governor Muhammad Ali in Cairo, Egypt. Naturally, the first reaction to learning this information is, huh? This is exceptionally strange. Why Nintendo decided to use a Levant architecture for this level is something I will never entirely grasp. I've searched high and low for interviews or developer insights, but nothing has pointed me to a reason why this highly specific choice was made. This enduring mystery of the skybox was something that puzzled me back in the early 2000s when I first played this game, and it never really left my mind since. Even knowing what this image is, it still befuddles me beyond belief. To round back to the core central idea of Mario 64 being a mysterious game with a lot of hidden elements, I can only beg people to realize that Wet Dry World is at the center of it all, beating heart of this enigmatic cartridge, the apex of the mystery. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but this specific choice to place a Middle Eastern town as the skybox gives me a very, very dark theory. More on that later. Let's continue with the rest of the stars, shall we? Secrets in the Shallows and Sky sucks. It just sucks. I hate to speak so poorly of the star, but this level is for the birds. Mario must travel across and punch several yellow blocks and shove large metal cubes around 5 times until the star spawns. The locations of each secret feel haphazardly random at best and actively frustrating at worst. The only benefit the star presents is an easy way to obtain the 100 coin star. Express Elevator, Hurry Up, tasks you with draining the water and punching a block across the gargantuan steel cage. Making your way up to the top of the cage without raising the water, you slam on the wooden elevator, race it down to the bottom, and take it back up to receive the star. The lack of water to obtain this star highlights the massive scale of the platforming objects. Everything looks comically oversized for Mario to jump on, like all of the construction equipment was intended for giant hands. There are giant planks of wood that seem way too big for anyone to lift. The seeming staircase cuts are way too big for Mario to platform on. Everything just makes him feel small and by comparison. The last 2 stars are very simple and take place in the final area of the level, so I'll cover them together. Observant viewers will notice the large steel cage I've neglected to talk about in the corner of the level. By raising the water level to this top or blasting to a cannon, Mario can swim down a cramped concrete tunnel and reach a small, enclosed town that cannot be exited once entered. Both stars are incredibly simple to grab, either hunting for 8 red coins or using the vanish cap to slip to the cage, but the town itself is far more interesting than any star. Scattered around the buildings are unopenable doors with sealed windows. A large courtyard/church in the direct center of town, with a massive black sculpture of sorts directly overseeing it. There is an astronomical amount of details here, so I'll start slowly. Firstly, the town is directly barred from the rest of the stage. There's no way to properly exit, and it's surrounded by concrete walls that block out the sky. Secondly, the buildings. Their purpose is left a mystery, but buildings would heavily imply that someone had lived there at some point. But where did everyone go? The town is completely abandoned, only populated by insects. Well, given the ability to freely control the water, it wouldn't come out of left field to say that whatever inhabitants had lived here drowned. Thirdly, the structure in the middle. Given the Middle Eastern skybox, my first assumption was a kind of primitive mosque, but the architecture of the pointed top and the sort of Holy of Holies figure points to a clear Judeo-Christian building style. This would date this course back to thousands of years into the earliest points of the Old Testament, which is never something I thought would think about taking place in a Super Mario game. Curiously, the black granite-like structure in the middle highly resembles a throne, which is troubling imagery for a temple. As the house of the Lord's worship, this strange idol-like structure can be seen as worshipping someone who isn't God, which conjures troubling images to say the least. given the focus on water levels and flooding. Fourthly, if there is a black throne in the temple, who is it intended for? If worship of the Lord wasn't the focus of this once tabernacle, then who or what was being worshipped? Perhaps most disturbing of all, this is the end of the level. Once you collect all the stars, that's it. There is no greater explanation or details or anything I've mentioned. You just leave the paintings and jump right into Tall Tall Mountain. But I'm not satisfied with that. This level is too strange, too out of place for me to rest easy. There are secrets hidden within this level, and I firmly believe they're in my grasp. If you will entertain me, please keep an open mind with what I'm about to say. I'd like to start going through the official material before I start delving into the deepest waters. We're all familiar with the course name in English, but what about its native Japanese name, or other localized names? According to the Mario Wiki, Wet Dry World is a portmanteau pun of the words flooded and city in Japanese. This description of a sunken or lost city is repeated in Chinese, Korean, and German. Then there's Spain. So the original language and its closest sister languages describe the area as a lost or drowned city, which tracks with the underwater skybox and level theme. The question is, why was this city flooded? Natural disasters aren't something that commonly illustrated in Mario games. Why would a stage in Super Mario Bros. 64 be intentionally flooded? In the Old Testament, God the Father deems every single inhabitant of the world he had created wicked and immoral and decided to start from scratch by releasing a flood that wiped them all out, with the exception of a righteous man named Noah and his family, who later repopulated the earth. The story of Noah's Ark is one of the most famous moments of the most iconic piece of literature ever recorded. The nature of the flood and how it occurred is still widely debated among scholars and skeptics alike, but one common theory is that all the water was produced by a firmament that used to hang high above the earth. God simply let the firmament collapse and sweep the world clean. And the firmament is commonly depicted in Hebrew cosmology as a ring of water above the earth. Sound familiar? There are several reasons why I've landed on this theory. Firstly, the skybox's buildings being in very old countries that have existed in geographically irrelevant areas to the Bible, especially with the mosque from Egypt. The church or tabernacle or temple in the town highly insists upon itself, which all points to this being a very, very old biblical location. All of this was to say that whomever lived in this ruined, drowned city were once antediluvian sinners whom God wiped from the face of the earth, and Mario is walking on the roads these faceless, anonymous figures once walked on countless years ago. Man can commit sin in countless ways, but how sinful for the Wet Dry World inhabitants, whoever they were. With this throne as my evidence, I accuse these previous inhabitants of the sin of worshipping alternative gods in the place of the one true God of Israel. Exodus 20, verse 5. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Placing any figure of worship before the Lord will bound to make him furious, so it is no surprise that this isolated group will be considered grave sinners and deemed worthy of being swept away. There's still one burning question at the heart of all this. Who or what was being worshipped? The black stone throne must have a purpose. I propose that this group of early Israelites were worshipping a giant, and I can prove it. It might trouble some to know that giants were very much a part of the Old Testament, if even a small part. The Nephilim are a seldomly spoken group of people who existed before the flood, who were described as the results of encounters between the sons of God and daughters of men. The daughters of men are fairly cut and dry as an analog for human women, but sons of God is a little bit more nebulous. Some say that it describes angels, or demigods, or false gods from other religions, but all agree that their nature is more celestial than terrestrial. This is a very deep and esoteric topic that is well deserving of its own video, but I'll leave that territory for the professionals, like Mr. Mythos. What I can say is that Nephilim are often translated as giants. Worshipping a Nephilim makes more sense when you examine the level once again. All the giant construction materials and concrete structures become logical when you consider that they were built by giant hands. The huge throne would also greatly befit someone of that size. The normal-sized buildings would imply that regularly sized people lived there, likely in both worship and fear of the Nephilim who resided there. Given how many thousands of years ago this was, all the bones and remains of the inhabitants were likely picked apart by bottom feeders and drifted out into open sea. This might also explain why the town was sealed off from the rest of the area. The trees in the very corner of town imply that agriculture and vegetation were part of the enclosed life inside, so perhaps the giant sealed off his subjects, preventing them from escape. Let me take a step back and explain everything from top to bottom. This town was inhabited by ancient Israelites somewhere between Yemen and Egypt, who were worshipping a Nephilim in place of the Lord. The flood that God caused swept them both and the Nephilim off the face of the earth, and Mario is traversing their ruins countless years later to stop Bowser's rise from power. If that's all true, this paints a very strange, very disturbing picture of Wet Dry World. Like the negative emotional aura is the screams and cries of antediluvian sinners begging for forgiveness from Sheol, from a vengeful God who will give them none. But that's just my theory. Mario 64 has become a strange, strange experience on the internet, and Wet Dry World is just the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes, literally. This is but one level in the game, and there are many, many unexplained events that are begging for deep analyses. The Ally with Info in the DS port, Cold Cold Crevice in Cool Cool Mountain, and so much more. I humbly thank you for joining me in this investigative journey. If you're interested in more content focused specifically in the Super Mario Bros., then you've come to the right place. That's what I specialize in, and I usually upload every weekend. If this sounds like your cup of tea, I humbly ask to put a like on the video, and perhaps a subscription as well. I am oh so close to 1,000 subscribers, and I plan something quite special if I reach that number. I don't have monetization enabled for my channel because I don't have enough engagement, but that isn't anyone's fault. But instead a frustrating quirk of the algorithm. So I ask of you, dear viewer, to spread this video to the high heavens. There really isn't a humble way to ask people to fund your YouTube channel because you don't want a regular job, but let me sweeten the deal by saying I fully intend to keep making videos for a long time, entirely for free. But if I start to gain more popularity and begin to earn more from the channel, I can absolutely promise everyone that I fully intend on spending money to make this channel bigger and better, all for you. I might finally have enough money to afford a better microphone. What do you think about that? You think Wendigo would be interested in Mario 64? I hope so. I'd get pretty damn far if I got a shout out from him. Sorry, I'll stop shilling now and just start on the next project. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you for joining me.